Hi, and welcome to another episode. It's another quick shot episode. We're just going to be focusing on putting rocks as an underpainting so that when we lay water over it, it looks like the rocks are actually sitting underwater. So the way you accomplish this is you paint the rocks first with acrylic paint, let them dry completely, and then you put a base of liquid clear over it, and then you paint the water over that. And then what the effect is that you get through the transparent oil paint, you will always see the opaque acrylic paint underneath. So it will look like they are actually sitting underwater. So right here, I have mixed up some different colors. And what it is I have a lighter color and a darker color. Sometimes I'll use brown, sometimes I'll use black, white, it doesn't matter. As long as one side is lighter than the other. So you want to pick a color, make sure that there's a light version of it and a dark version of it. And how we do that is we are going to grab paint of the lighter version on one side. There's nothing on that side, but it's on that side. And then I'm going to take the darker color and I'm going to run my brush on that side to it. So now I have a dark side and a light side. Dark side, light side. And I know you Star Wars fans are smiling right now. Okay. So we also want to create the illusion of depth in our painting. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that we have the rocks in the far back very, very small, and as they come forward they get bigger and bigger and bigger. So I have my dark paint underneath. Light paint, dark paint. That's how I'm holding it on here. And what you're going to do is you're going to do a simple little motion like this. Okay? Under each rock. Just 1, 2, 3, 4. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find our spot back here. And you see I'm just slowly putting in some rocks. Small, small rocks. Doesn't have to be anything exciting. Doesn't have to have any detail at all. These are just very, very far away rocks. Now as I'm losing my light and dark, I want to go in here and grab a little more dark and a little more lighter color. Light's on top, dark's on the bottom. And we're just going across like this. So now you can see, if you get in a little closer, you can see that the brighter part is up here and the darker part is here. And that's because I have the dark paint underneath and the light paint on top. Now, when you go into this, you want to make sure that you're holding your brush straight on so that when you push into the canvas, the two colors are actually touching the canvas. That's how you get that little mark, okay? So you want to make sure that the two different colors are at the very tip of your brush and you're actually getting the variation in color on here, okay? So we're just going to keep going with our little rocks all the way across. You see I'm just doing a quick little bloop like that. I'm running out of dark color, so I'm going to get a little more of that. Get a little more light color on here. You definitely want to see the differences between the two sides of light and dark, okay? Otherwise, if you have just one color and there's no variation in it whatsoever, you are not going to get a very effective 3D looking rock. So now I have this thin layer going all the way across here. Now as I come forward, we're going to go a little bit bigger. Be sure to overlap the rocks that are behind like that, all right? Make sure you're overlapping just a little bit, just to push the rocks that you just did into the far background, because these rocks are a little bit bigger. And mix it up. The last thing you want to do is what I call typewriter painting. And typewriter painting is when someone is so systematic about everything they do. They just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you get that ding, 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 ding. You want to make sure that you're actually putting rocks in front of other rocks. That's what fills in the, I got a little white paint on there. That's okay, we'll be covering that up anyway. We'll be putting these rocks in front of the other rocks to give it more depth. If you just do a ding, 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 that's not really going to work, because then you're just going to have lines of rocks that look like someone sat there and placed them in there, and that's not what we're going for. We're going for just random rocks. So one of the worst things you can do with this is completely overthink it too. So now, as you can see, it's already starting to look like it's going in the far background. And we're just going to keep adding bigger and bigger rocks as they come forward. Now the trick is to know when to stop making them bigger and just deal with the size that you want to be in the front. You can easily have huge boulders up here in the front if you get carried away. And this kind of painting, it's very easy to get carried away. We're just going to keep adding these little rocks. Now if you get in a little closer as well, you can see I am leaving some dark areas. Like right in here, there's a couple of dark areas right in here. You want that to be dark because that just adds to the shadowing. The shadows on the rocks will help sell it that these rocks are just scattered about and randomly sitting near each other. You don't want to have the whole thing covered to where there's no shadow. Those black areas actually help you convince your viewer that there's a whole bunch of shadow there. Okay, so now we have another couple of layers of those sizes. We'll come in here and we'll start getting even bigger. Now the closer you get to the front, the faster it's going to go, because now you can add these huge rocks that just take up a lot more space. All right, so let's get a little more paint on here. Okay. And we're going to keep going with our big old rocks. Okay, I'm going to get a little more black on my canvas, my little tinfoil palette that I use for my acrylic. Now remember, these are acrylic paints, so they dry fairly quickly and they dry very opaque, which is exactly what we want. Now oil paints, they take a lot longer to dry. But with the acrylics, you can see the rocks are really starting to form now. The closer you get, the more you can, those variations are going to show up. So now we're just going to keep going with bigger rocks. And I'm stacking them. I'm putting them in front of each other. So right here, you have the rocks that I just did. So this next layer, I'm going to grab some paint, and you see how I'm putting it just a little bit in front. I'm not covering up the whole thing, but I'm covering up just the very edge part of it, just so that it looks like it's sitting in front of instead of underneath. That's the kind of little details that help sell it as realistic. And here's my little white oops that I made, so we'll just cover that up with rocks. Look at that, it's gone. And I'm just going to keep adding in more rocks. Okay. Now if you take a step back a little bit, you can actually see how it looks like these rocks are going farther and farther into the distance, and that is exactly what we want. Now I'm pretty close to the size of the rocks that I want to keep them at. I don't really want them much bigger than this. I want to make sure that my rocks don't get too big on me. Otherwise we're going to have some pretty big boulders sitting right up front, and that's not really the kind of painting I'm going for. I mean, if you want big boulders up front, you can make your rocks as big as you want. It doesn't matter. For this particular painting, I'm going to keep it very even, about medium-sized rocks. So I'm at the point where I'm just going to keep filling in rocks now. And just watch the motion of that brush. That's the most important thing. It really is. the motion of the brush, I'm just making a little swipe, a little curved upward swipe. And that gives you the nicest little rounded rocks that you'd see in like a riverbed. You can go in there and try and paint each individual rock, and it will look, you know, just as good. But why kill yourself? Work smarter, not harder, right? And this is just a nice, quick, effective way of making these little rock beds that really bring a painting to life, with the water sitting on top of it and having a very transparent look to it because of the oil paints being transparent. Because we got to remember, the acrylic is very opaque and oil paints are very transparent. So when your acrylic dries and you lay your oil paints over it, you are going to have a really cool looking effect. It's going to look just like rocks sitting under the water's edge. Some of these in the far background will, depending on how you do your water, might, you know, disappear a little bit, but as the water comes closer and becomes more and more transparent, wow, man, does it really look cool. I mean, it really has an effect, and I love it. Okay, so we're just going to keep going, and I'm just adding rocks. Just keep adding rocks. I'm trying to keep the same size now. I don't want to go any bigger than what I've got. So I am just going to keep adding them, putting them in front of each other at the very bottom. So I'm not going to put it in front of this one because I don't want to cover it completely, but at the very bottom here, I'm going to cover up some of that edge, and that's what gives you your depth. Because the more that it comes forward, the more it's going to get covered, and we are just creating our depth by that simple little trick. That illusion of depth is something that you learn in elementary school art. You want to make sure that you have the two tones, okay? You don't want to have just one solid color. You have to make sure that you're getting the dark undertone and the bright upper tone. The bright on top, dark on the bottom. Otherwise, you just have one color and you lose that effect of being a 3D object. You gotta have the shadow underneath your rock for this to work. If you don't, it's just gonna look like whatever color you're using, a bunch of balls sitting underwater, and you don't want that. You want them to have that effect of being not a sphere, but an actual object that has texture and dark and light. Okay, so we're just gonna keep going. We're almost done. And it really doesn't take that long to do this. Once you get into a rhythm, you can really knock this out fairly quickly. You just have to decide where you want your composition to go with this. Okay, so now if we take a step back, you can actually see how well that it just kind of goes off into the distance. It just disappears on us off into the distance here. So you got your nice rocks up front, but it goes way far off in the distance back. So it gives the illusion of depth, and that's what we want to see in these paintings. So now the next step would be to let this dry, put a coat of liquid clear over it, and then whatever watercolor you're using, you can even use the reflections and pull those down, and you have such an amazing effect with rocks underwater. But that's how you create those little rocks just all over the place underwater. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something, and we'll see you again when I post my next video.